So this is MS Office Hours, and today we are continuing our Microsoft Teams adoption series. So we're going to dive into a little bit more. When last we touched on this subject, we went through a whole litany of various tools that are available to you for driving Office adoption. As a matter of fact, that list is longer than it's ever been, and you can find that if you're a member of this team, as all of you are, under the resources channel within this team and on the wiki tab where we maintain the links to all these videos and the video series, and as well as these resources for Teams adoption. I will continue to better organize those over time, but today we're going to focus specifically on the getting started of driving adoption. Now, I just want to clarify this. This is sort of the post deployment. So we've already decided we're going to deploy Teams. We've already figured out what's our general governance and guidance around Teams. And you know what, as a matter of fact, real quick, I'm going to show something again because it's been a while since I brought this up. And this is one of my all-time favorite pages around Teams. If you just go to docs.microsoft.com and then go to Office, and then we'll select IT admins, and then we'll select Teams from here. Why is nothing ever straightforward right where I want it to be? And we'll see if it's here under welcome. References, Teams for Education. Okay, and I'll grab this URL and go put it in the IM window for you guys in just a second. But right here is this Microsoft Education Governance FAQ for admins. We are not going to go over this today. This is one of the all-time best ones that I've seen for this here. If I can get it so it'll let me paste into this window. We'll get it there in just a second. There we go. So it helps answer a whole bunch of questions around Teams for the IT pros. What we're focused on today, though, is after all that stuff is set up, we've made those decisions, or we've chosen not to make those decisions. A valid decision is to make no decision. May not always be a good one, but it's a valid decision nonetheless. So enough of my smart aleck pondering here. What we're going to dive into is that Microsoft says there are essentially three primary phases that are part of the best practices adoption process. What I want to do is try to walk you guys through some of this so that we can determine where you are in the process with your institution, and then what would be the next steps with it. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that I get the chance to work with a lot of you pretty closely, and I think very few of you are past phase one today, in large part because that's not typically how we've done things in education. Normally what happens is somebody comes and says, I want to use this thing, and you go, okay, let me just see if I can set it up and govern it and control it, get to meet all the policies, in which case I come back to you and go, okay, that thing's in place, go use it. Maybe we develop some training, some professional development, that type of stuff for it. We don't do a lot of rollout management. So I will tell you that the most successful IT projects that I've worked on, and for every one of you, I'm sure you can kind of say the same things, when there was a full change management process in place where we notified users, communicated to them, and went through all that training and did that, we were far more successful. I know all of you have projects that you do that with. So what I want to do is give you a set of rails that you can put your train on for the driving adoption of Teams within the education institution in much that same way. And so the way that we're going to do that is to assume that, first of all, we've got Teams installed on machines. The Teams desktop application works far better than trying to figure out which feature works in which browser, all these things, which we talk about a lot. So I'm a big fan of deploying that desktop application, and to assume that everybody has licenses for Teams as well. As well as, frankly, you're going to need licenses to things like SharePoint Online, right? That's a requirement, a prerequisite. Teams absolutely relies on SharePoint Online, so definitely want to do that. The Exchange, some of those things you really should do as well, but we can talk more about that. There are some specific nuances and lots of documentation around it. So the adoption phases we're going to talk about are phase one, start, phase two, experiment, and phase three, scale. And so we'll spend most of the time today on just the start, and we may not even get to scale depending on the amount of time that we have here today. But what we really want to talk about is how do we do this? What does this actually mean? So we have some adoption prerequisites. Go look at that, follow these links, do all those things, right? This is all in the links that I put at the top of the chat window up there. You guys can get to it. You can also just go to docs.microsoft.com/Microsoft Teams adoption phase one. So you can see the URL there. This is really talking about who are the people that should be involved in this. And you may cut this list short, you may add a few other people, but you need people to sort of fill these roles, right? Executive sponsors, success owner, all those types of things. The challenge is for many of you, your role might actually be IT specialist. You may not be the person actually driving this. That's completely up to you. I don't know your organization or your particular role. This success owner, though, is probably one of the key fundamental roles within this whole thing. This is the person that's really going to ensure that we understand what are the institutional goals. So if this is a classroom driven experience, and we need to understand what or the desired outcomes within that classroom. If we're doing something, say the housing department in a higher ed, we need to understand what their goals are. If we're in a K-12 and we're working with the food services, what is it we're trying to accomplish? So everybody in here plays a very important role. So if for whatever reason you don't have a separate person for each of these, make sure that you have someone who understands they may own both of these roles and understand what their responsibilities are. Don't just eliminate one because you have a smaller staff or you have less availability, that type of thing. This is not meant to be the guaranteed most rigid thing in the world, but the closer you follow these directions, the easier it's going to be for you to just follow the directions and get it done. It's not a race, right? It's not a sprint anyway. It's more of a marathon. So this way, if you follow these directions, you don't have to keep rethinking everything, rehashing it. You sort of know what your next steps are because it's going to walk you through it. Here are some of the additional resources. We talked about these last week, the Teams technical community and the Champion program, which is an Office 365 Champion program. This is really more for those end users that you're going to get involved in this, those folks like your community manager and your community lead, department leads, that type of stuff. Our next step here is to understand teams and channels. Most of you guys kind of get this, but please remember that not everybody you're going to bring into this conversation with you is an expert on teams or even just a spurt, right? A half an expert. I don't know. Don't assume they know anything about teams. As a matter of fact, we probably ought to, on this call, at some point go back and do a basic Teams 101, how to use it and be successful with it, because there are so many little tiny tricks that add tremendous value to your day. But dive through some of this stuff and realize you're going to have to kind of start at the beginning explaining the difference between private and public teams and how public teams aren't actually exposed to outside world. They're only people who have access to your tenant, right? So understanding some of that. The next thing is just around how do we use teams to drive cross-functional collaboration, which is really just to say, what is a model for starting our first team? And this is not a bad thing to look at. It's the idea that I have an organization and that organization has some kind of a team name, and then I have a channel name, and then I have files and notes and tabs, all that stuff, right? You guys get all that. Now, how does that map to the real world? And so going, okay, I have this instead of Northwest Sales District, maybe this is my accounting department. And then I say, okay, here are the different channels I need inside of there, and kind of mapping this out before you start, right? That's really what that's about. There we go. So creating your first teams in Microsoft Teams. Now, this isn't about how do I create a team? You guys know how to go in and click the button to create a team. You're all nerds. You're good at that, right? The question is, what team should you create? What channel should you create inside of that that will generate the most likelihood of your success in this process? So we recommend that you start off with these 3 teams that are listed here below: Get to Know Teams, Microsoft Teams Implementation, and Teams Champions. And as you can imagine, not everybody's a part of all 3 of these necessarily, but kind of depends on how you want to put it together. And here are some proposed channels, right? So the first one is just about as you add people in, they want to be able to come in and just find a place to play, a place to get some support on this, or even to have their ideas heard, right, through ideas for future teams. What teams would they like to have? That might be an ideal place eventually to put in that workflow that we did last week on doing teams approvals, if you choose to lock those down for whatever reason, like the naming stuff that Greg brought up. The Microsoft Teams implementation, this is really all those people we were talking about a little bit ago, all those stakeholders that we're going to bring into this process, as we onboard them, this is a team that will bring them into so that they can participate and be aware of these things. Hold on. I know your first reaction is go, wait a minute. You wanted to have the executive sponsor in here, and they don't really need to be involved in each one of these or see what's going on in each one of these. And part of this is around adopting how we work and what we do. There's a ton of information that doesn't necessarily need to be hidden from those people who are a part of it. This may not be an active part of it. So they can favorite the channels they care about. You can tell them in advance, here are the ones I want you to favorite. You can set those to be auto-favorited by all members. The ones that not everyone is necessarily going to participate in, who are a part of this early adopter program, this champion program, you can just have the people who need to favorite those and work with them. But having them be able to see this and be a part of it is vital. One of the things that I really encourage you guys to do in this process is to make sure that you take those key business stakeholders that you'll be working with in this and allow them to be a part of the planning process. Even, let them at least set in the room as a fly on the wall in the conversations that you're having around planning and deployment and those things. Because in many cases, they're going to give you feedback that you otherwise might not have seen. It's really about creating that diversity within your team to ensure that you don't have as many biases as you would otherwise, right? You get into the tab gallery and how are you going to put all that in there. It really kind of suggests, how we suggest you setting up some of the tabs that are inside of here. So this is very specific guidance. You can come in, dive through this all you want to find out more about it. These links are things that will be relatively familiar to you guys. These are things we've talked about before. You may have used one or two of these. This is about how do I use them in succession in a way that makes sense and sort of categorizing those. So inside that awareness and adoption channel, from the Microsoft Teams deployment team that was listed up above, right? This is the type of information that we're going to put in there, that this is the stuff we're going through right now. So the link to this site would be in there, right? Whereas if we get down here into security and compliance, this is documentation around security and compliance, right? Guess what this roadmap links to? What? It's that Office 365 Security Adoption Roadmap, which is the other series we've been covering here, right? So it links you right to that first 30 days website. So this is the type of content you want to put in there to help you seed those channels with content to help everyone understand their intent and purpose, right? And that's really what these are kind of about, to help you with that. Now, the next question becomes, are you guys really ready for this? Are you far enough along to start this sort of rollout and do it? And that's really what this is here to help you with. So assessing your stakeholders, identifying early adopters, and evaluating the organization's overall readiness for change, right? And many of you have done this either formally, or maybe it's a subjective measure, conversation you have with your boss, whatever. We're all fairly informal typically in those types of things, but in some cases it can certainly already have taken on a formal capacity for you. So what we ask you to do is to assess your stakeholders, and there are some questions here. You can read through those, and we would encourage you to maybe even consider adding your own questions in addition to these. The idea is that if somebody's going to answer yes to all of these questions, they might make a good candidate. We're not saying that they will absolutely. As a matter of fact, in that purple box, what they're calling out is saying that, yes, you could go in and assign a point value to this, and then anybody who scores above a 7 is automatically ingested. But really what we found is, in working with lots of organizations, that just doesn't work out. It's far better to pick and choose who are going to be your early access stakeholders based upon your own assessment, or whoever's running this program's assessment, using these and other questions accordingly. So just go into Microsoft Forms, create a form, put these questions in there, right? And then people who are interested, ask them to complete this questionnaire, and then that will help you in deciding whom you want to invite into this program. And remember that just because somebody wants to play around with new technology or try it out, that's not the person to bring into this, right? We're looking for early adopters, not just gadget geeks, right? So we want people who kind of fit these criteria here. Essentially people who like to work well with others. They're good. They're not afraid of technology, not afraid of change. They tend to be people who are influencers, things like that. You guys can kind of read through those, but that's the kind of stuff you want to do. And then finally, we want to start to assess the organization's readiness for change in general, right? You kind of have a pulse for that today, where you guys are at. And then as we start to sort of narrow that down to, okay, maybe the entire organization isn't just chomping at the bit to go adopt teams. We're not hearing that from everybody, but it does turn out that we've got these couple of groups that have been kind of on us about Slack or Teams, or maybe we're already paying for Slack over there, and Teams is already included in all this stuff that we have. So maybe that's a good group to go and pilot this with, that type of thing. As we're looking for these different folks and who we'd work with, one of the important things is to make sure that we're not just going with some random project because we came up with a project, but instead we're going to go find a real business need and go fill that even during this initial early adopter phase, right? So we are looking for some specific people that would be a part of that as well. So we want a good project that we're going to work on, and we want people who are self-starters, in that we don't have to hold their hands so much, right? They're going to dive into this and they're going to do some work, and they understand that's part of it, right? They're people who do very well at learning things, helping one another out, right? And what we can do to sort of avoid the time suck that comes with training a bunch of people, because this is early adopters. We want this to go smoothly and with as little of our effort required, because we'll just be creating the content. We'll just be getting together this rollout process, and if they require all that to be polished and done, they're not the right candidate, right? The other thing here is just really, how does this affect other things that you're doing? Just be careful you're not in the middle of an Exchange migration to Office 365. Half the people on Exchange online, half the people Exchange on-prem, and that are in this project, and at some point in the middle they might move, right? Those, it's better to find those people who are already in, say, the end state of the migration, so that there isn't disruption in the middle of the project. So I hope you guys understand. I'm not trying to tell you that any of this stuff is Preston's original ideas or content. What I am instead trying to do is help you look at this documentation and interpret it for your educational institution. So this really should just be things that, as you read through this, ignore when they talk about the sales department, ignore when they talk about your industry, whatever that they're going on and on about, right? Focus on, how would I use this inside my education industry in general, right? So what we're going to do is, for phase 2, then this is where we actually start playing around and really try to do 2 to 3 real world projects total. And so we have a group that we're going to have led by our stakeholders, right? Those people that we already vetted and said they met all those criteria. And we're going to work with them, not just to have them start using this, but providing feedback to us. Now, here's one of the key things from phase 1 that I didn't mention that is documented in there, which is, it's vital that we manage the adoption and rollout of Teams through Teams. I know that kind of seems like a no-brainer, but I think you'd be surprised, maybe even at yourselves, but certainly at the number of institutions I work with that use email to communicate during the Teams adoption process. Listen, one of the coolest tricks that you're ever going to use as you start to roll this out is set up that team that we talked about with the channels that it showed you there, for all the driving awareness, doing all that, right, for the group that's going to work together. And then watch, when you go and right click on a team, you can get the email address for any individual channel. So it's actually in that ellipsis menu, right, at the edge of every channel. I can get the email address for that channel. What that means is, when somebody sends you an email that's about this project, reply to the channel, not to the individual, and certainly not reply all, right? But instead, take it and push it right into the channel where it belongs. And that will take the email message, push it into the channel, and now we can go back into having a threaded conversation inside the Teams channel, right? So you don't have to chastise people when they fall into a habit of just using email to ask a quick question or to send information out. Instead, what you should do is just simply correct the action by taking and forwarding that message into the Teams channel, and then replying, which you could do by even adding an @mention to the channel itself, right? Now, remember, when I @mention a team, everybody gets the notification. If I @mention a channel, only the people who are subscribed to that channel get that notification. So it makes it so that when people are in a channel or in a team with a bunch of channels, they don't get all that excess noise. So kind of another reason why you should manage the channels that you have favored, right? All right. So as we go into this, then what we want to do, these are kind of the 6 steps that you will go through: create your champions program, complete your governance quick start. That's kind of a separate thing that I'm not getting into in this conversation, but you need to do that. And I showed you that education specific FAQ you'll want to dive into. Define your very specific use cases that you're working with during your initial rollout here. Finalize that early adopter participants, exactly who's going to participate. They understand what's expected of them. And then set up your feedback channels and bring support staff on board, right? Because even what we want to do is during this early adopter phase is we want the support staff to A, be aware of it, and B, learn from it so that they're more prepared to scale as well. So as we talk about creating a champions program, first I have to take a drink because Preston's been talking too long. We do have some pretty good guidance here on how to go about this. So this is kind of that overall launch plan that you would look at. Try to get it all fit on one page here for you. So we talked about identifying your key stakeholders, right? Identify the business scenarios, create the success plan, right? I'm a big proponent of having a success plan. Determining what I mean by that is, what are your success criteria? In order for us to come out the other end of this thing and say, yes, it was a success, we accomplished what we wanted, we first have to say, what are the criteria by which we would judge that? So let's get that down. Then we can work backwards in that success plan to say, here are the things we need to do to accomplish that. So big fan of having that written down. It doesn't have to be some dramatic documentation that's developed, but instead needs to be this very simple. Here's what we have to do to accomplish this. Here are the general timeframes. Focus on the big rocks, right? And then we get into where we can measure and share success and reiterate. So because we have the success plan, we can say, here's how well we did. We got 80% of the way on the first one, 100% on the second one, 75% on the third one. And now we can reset those goals and do it again. So as we scale, we can continue to measure our success and improve from it. And you guys can look through the rest of this, but you kind of get the idea of how you would use this to run these sort of parallel tasks that are going on in the organization, right? I'll leave that for you to come back and go through. The biggest thing about champions, right? This is where we get into now. A champion is, we've decided who are our stakeholders. We finalize that. These are the people who are involved in it. And it's really important that they get formally trained in Teams itself. So what I mean by that, you're going to see in those resources I provided to you some in-depth resources, even instructor-led classes that we provide, or online at your own pace courses, depending on your audience, which fits them better. But they need to be formally trained in how to use Teams, because if they miss some basic things like how to filter the activities feed so that they can see all their at mentions or just see certain types of messages, or if they miss the recommendations around how do we favorite teams and favorite channels, do things like that, their experience inside of Teams could be very poor, and they, by the nature of this program, are going to replicate whatever they do to everyone else. So it is important that we get them well trained. Secondly, they need to be consistently and repeatedly encouraged to share their knowledge, right? To go out and not just educate, but inspire and motivate others. That's a big part of what we're doing with this champions program, is to go show people, check out this cool stuff I did. Look at this. Oh, me communicating with my students is so much easier. Now I just do it on the bus on the way back and forth to campus each day, and it's no big deal. Right? I've started taking an Uber so that I can handle all these communications. I don't know, making stuff up, whatever it is. Have a consistent positive reinforcement that affirms the impact of their efforts. This is a rewards program. It can be as simple as a, hey, good job, right? But we have a consistent way in which we interact with them. We evaluate how they're doing. We give them feedback, and it can't be placated or false in any way, because people notice that. So what's a way that you can affirm their impact to say, hey, here's what's happening as a result of this? We want that to always be a positive conversation. We really want to focus on the things that they're doing that are raising the bar, that are driving this project forward, right? And then, of course, having that clear plan to execute should be kind of a given as you build this out. And that's what this tool does, is give you that sort of thing. We do have a champions program guide that you can utilize to set all this up. I highly recommend using it. It is a very in-depth process. This particular one is not so bad. It's about 18 slides long. It tells them what a champion is, right? They're a superhero. This is what we expect from them. It gets into why they matter, why they're so important to this project. They're not just somebody we're asking to test this out. They are a vital part of this program. And it's important for you to understand that so that you can articulate it well. And then finally, we get into exactly how they're going to provide that value to the overall organization, what's expected of them in the process. And then this is really about what we can do to help motivate them, that thing that I was talking about before, and how well we see all of that working. So this is just some great sort of feedback things that you can use in that process. So you guys can look through that at your own leisure. Just kind of wanted to take you through it so you could at least see the basics of what was in there. So you should have a team that is set up for all of your champions. So that was kind of discussed in that previous phase, right, as one of the first teams that you want to create. But make sure you have that set up to where they have a way, they all know they're in the champion program. We want them all communicating with one another. We want them giving us feedback. We want that very easy way for them to work with the tool. That adds more familiarity with the team in and of itself. All right, hold regular monthly meetings, promote enthusiasm, all of that. This is one that gets overlooked a ton. I know everybody's busy, but even if it's an online Teams meeting, right? It can be video conferencing. Just because you're on the same campus doesn't mean it isn't more efficient to use video conferencing, right? I don't care whether in K-12 or higher ed, getting people to use video gives you body language, gives you so much more sense of a relationship being built. Listen, you guys, I come on here, I turn my camera on. Why do I do that? It's so that you get to know me and you can determine whether I'm genuine or full of whatever, right? Using that camera is vital to this process. Either meet with them in person or turn your camera on and make that part of the prerequisites. I'm a big fan of that. It gets everybody using the tools better if you say part of this program is using the camera during these meetings. Be clear about the program requirements. That just makes sense. We're talking about adults here, treat them accordingly. Now, that said, we may be talking about students both in K-12 and higher ed. And I have this happen all the time. Some of you guys on the call did this, where you have an instructor who wants to be one of the first people to pilot it. So they come in and do this. There's a great example at UT Arlington, University of Texas Arlington, where Dr. Ponce fired this up. He was one of the first guys, literally, I think the first one to do it in the classroom. And he went gangbusters with it just this last semester, and had a young lady who actually talked about, it came up in her job interview as a result of that, and the way they used it. So that you can absolutely include students in these early pilots, so long as they all understand as well sort of what you're doing, and that that professor is that conduit of feedback to you guys from the students as well. But give that some thought, how you want to bring those in, who you want to work with. Find ways to reward them, whether it's things like the provost maybe considering an award for classroom innovation, or the superintendent mentioning, the teachers that were involved, the instructors or the staff that are involved at the next all hands meeting, doing something, some way to recognize them. Maybe it's in front of the school board, right? And the school board giving them an innovator award, right? Something like that, a change agent program, something of that method, right? Train them early and often. Don't fall into the trap of, well, we had them take this video training, now they're all good, right? If you can bring them in on that monthly meeting, do kind of what we do here, have an open Q&A, and then do a little bit of training, like salt in. It doesn't even have to be half the time like we do here, but salt in some of that training. Okay, I know we didn't get through near all of this today, but I hope this was helpful. I'm going to stop the recording now, but before I do, I just want to say this is a set of guidance that I know nobody's looking for another job. Nobody's looking for more formalized work to do. But I assure you, when it comes to driving adoption across the large organizations that you all are in, with people who are time constrained and working according to schedules, the most effective and productive means of rolling out any technology is to have a structured approach to it. It doesn't mean you have to slam all of this into a 30-day window. What this means is you can be much more flexible with the time to roll it out because you have a roadmap. It means you can actually be more flexible in how you roll it out because you have a set number of sort of guiding principles that you're following. It also means that you have the ability to articulate to your leadership what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what the measurements of success are going to be. So thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to stop the recording now. I'll stick around for other questions afterwards.